Ever since Rangers disappeared, the Scottish League in the coefficients has absolutely dipped. Now, Celtic actually made a loss of around £12 million last year. This means that they have to try and find revenue somewhere. The transfer policy now at Celtic seems to be a bit more rushed, a bit short-sighted, a bit expensive, to be honest, as an attempt to try and bring short-term success rather than thinking long-term.
But I see it better now, 'cause everything you do only says you gotta figure it out.
What's up, guys? George Lyons here. Welcome back to the Soccernomics YouTube channel, and you're watching The Rounds. As usual, guys, before we hit off today's episode, just gonna let you know to hit that subscribe button if you are new. If you like football content, football finance, football economics, that sort of stuff, then this is the channel for you. So hit that subscribe button and continue watching. Right, so today's episode is clearly about Glasgow Celtic, more specifically what the hell is going on with the club. If you didn't know, guys, Celtic at the moment are not doing too great in the league or in Europe either. They are currently sitting in like 6th place in the Scottish Premier League, which is so not like Celtic at all, especially after so many years of domination. And I think they're winless as well in their group in the Europa League at time of filming, which is not too great either. And the easy thing to say is that Ange Postecoglou is not doing a great job at Celtic, but let's be honest, the problems lie a lot deeper than that, and this is what I'm going to highlight in this video. Let's start off with Celtic's domestic domination. Prior to last season, Celtic won 9 of the last 9 seasons in the Scottish Premier League, which is a massive achievement. They were clearly the best team in Scotland for those 9 years, and it was only until recent times where it started to get a bit more difficult for the club. Rangers were liquidated, and I think it was 2012 for major financial issues, and that was a huge turning point in not only Celtic's fortunes but also the Scottish Premier League. Look, there's no argument that Celtic and Rangers are the 2 biggest clubs in Scotland, and that rivalry is what fueled so many things in Scotland. With Rangers now gone, there was really no serious competition in the Scottish Premier League. Yeah, you had the likes of Aberdeen, Motherwell, Hibernian, Hearts. There's a lot of teams in Scotland that are pretty decent, but none that can seriously challenge for the Scottish title. And so the Scottish Premier League for a long amount of time became just a monopoly. Season after season, Celtic were just winning the league, dominating every single team because, let's be honest, they have got such a bigger budget, they're such a bigger club than every other club in the league. But of course, Rangers did rise up the leagues again and eventually managed to stop Celtic winning their 10th in a row. But why was domination an issue for Celtic? Well, this is the thing. Without competition or serious competition, there is a lack of innovation. There is a lack of needing to improve. When there's no real incentive to improve, the chances are you probably won't. Or maybe you just will, but not to the same extent as you would if there was someone who could potentially take over. The state of stability, as you can think of it, can cause instability when it comes to a bit of laziness, a bit of not really doing what you really should be. And that can have some seriously negative long-term effects. This sort of phase is called like the Minsky Moment, named after Hyman Minsky, who talked about how instability breeds stability. This sort of explains sort of what happened with the global financial crisis with financial institutions and just that god-awful thing that happened in 2008. And if you don't know what the global financial crisis is, I highly recommend you read that up because it's a very important thing that happened within our lifetime. Have a look at the film. What is it called? The Big Short. Watch that film. It's an incredible film. It's actually really funny, but yeah, I won't talk about that much more. Also, this lack of competition in this Monopoly League also had an adverse effect on the rest of the league, which also affected Celtic. Now, if you've watched one of my previous videos before, you'd know that I talked about the UEFA country coefficients. These are coefficients that rank the best leagues in the world and then give them sort of like a ranking that gives them a certain amount of Champions League spots. The higher ranking you are, the better chances you have of getting more spots into the Champions League or the Europa League or the Conference League. Now, Rangers are obviously a very big club and have competed and done very well in Europe, just like Celtic have as well. Now, Rangers are a much bigger club than some of the other clubs in Scotland, and they're a bit more competitive in Europe when it comes to getting as far into the competition. Ever since Rangers disappeared, the Scottish League in the coefficients has absolutely dipped. In the 17-18 season, Scotland were ranked 26th in the world for their league. Now, that only gave them 1 spot in the Champions League, which was obviously taken by Celtic every year. Now that Rangers are actually back in the Scottish Premier League and being more competitive, creating a more competitive league, these 2 teams have not only been more competitive domestically, but also on the European stage as well. Rangers, for example, reached the round of 16 last year, which is a lot further than any of the other clubs outside of Celtic have achieved in Europe since they went. Because performances of Scottish clubs have improved in recent times, their ranking has improved in the coefficients, and now they're sitting in 10th place, which not only looks a lot better, but it also gives them an extra entrant into the Champions League, and therefore that trickles down as well, giving more entrants to the Europa League for smaller clubs, and then also the Conference League as well. So not only did Rangers not being there affect Rangers, but it also affected every single club in Scotland as well. This monopoly and lack of competition also affected their finances. Income for a football club generally comes in 3 different sectors. So you've got your match day revenue, you've got your merchandise, and then you've got TV broadcasting rights and commercial rights. Match day revenue is a huge part of Celtic's income. They've got the biggest club stadium in Scotland, and they've got one of the biggest stadiums in the entire UK. I think their capacity is about 60,000. And of course, match day income is the amount of seats in the stadium times by the price of each ticket times by the amount of home games. So as you can imagine, that adds up to be a lot of money. However, revenue from football operations and stadiums has taken a huge hit in recent times. In fact, in 2019, Celtic's stadium and football operations income was about £43.2 million. Whereas in the 2021 annual report, Celtic recorded a £20.8 million revenue of football operations and stadium operations income. £22.4 million less than what they reported in 2019. That's a 52% reduction. Of course, a lot of this matchday revenue has taken a hit as a result of COVID and not letting fans obviously attend games. This is also as a result of a lack of European football competitiveness, having failed to qualify for the Champions League 4 years running and also not doing too much in the Europa League either. Merchandise revenue has actually increased over the last few years, going from 15 million last year to 22.6 million this year, which is about a 50% increase. But to be honest, even commercial and broadcasting revenue has taken a hit in recent times. There would obviously be many reasons as a result of this decrease, but you can't help but think that the lack of competition in the Scottish Premier League over the past 10 years up until now has something to do with it, as it becomes less of an interesting product to broadcasters and commercial rights as well for Celtic themselves, as well as the fact that Scottish clubs haven't really been performing in Europe over the past 4 or 5 years either. So Scottish football hasn't exactly been attracting ludicrous new deals. Now, Celtic actually made a loss of around £12 million last year. This means that they have to try and find revenue somewhere. And with the lack of a strong financial position, unfortunately, clubs like Celtic are having to sell their players. In fact, we saw this summer already with the sales of Christopher Ajer to Brentford for £13.5 million. Also, Odsonne-Édouard went to Crystal Palace for about £14 million. And even Ryan Christie, their captain, moved to Bournemouth this season for £2.5 million. They also lost Olivier Ncham to Swansea on a free transfer, and of course Scott Brown left as well, going to Aberdeen on a free too. There's also been a lot of departures of loan players as well. As a club, rather than finding long-term replacements to cover the gaps in the squad, they've just been taking loan players and basically filling in the gaps to cover them in the short term. This is a lot cheaper for the club in the short term because they can obviously just not pay a transfer fee and have these players plug in the gaps that they need for the season. Really important players in the first team last season for the club are now no longer there. Players such as Shane Duffy, Diego Laxalt, Mohamed Elyounoussi, and John Joe Kenny. With the lack of replacements already at the club and a lot of players leaving the club this season, the club has obviously had to make a huge overhaul of players this season. Which brings me to the next thing, which is of course transfers. Now, Celtic have traditionally been absolutely amazing when it comes to the transfer market, finding absolute gems such as Henrik Larsson, Virgil van Dijk, even Shinzuki Nakamura, these legends of the club. And despite being absolute giants in Scotland, Celtic are really a selling club, generally importing undiscovered young talents and then selling them off at a profit after improving them over a couple of years whilst they're at their peak. The money that they receive for selling these players is obviously reinvested back into the club, and it works. This system has been so successful for years now, and this is really good because there's not a lot of money in Scottish football. Recently, however, this hasn't really been so prevalent. The transfer policy now at Celtic seems to be a bit more rushed, a bit short-sighted, a bit expensive, to be honest, as an attempt to try and bring short-term success rather than thinking long-term. Players that come to mind are, of course, Joe Hart and James McCarthy. Although they're arriving on free transfers with bags of experience, they are also bringing hefty wages with them, and they're not bringing exactly long-term benefits that makes those wages worth it. Now, Celtic have actually made some really interesting signings. The first one that comes to mind is Kyogo Furuhashi, who seems to be a bargain at £4.5 million. And had they made this signing 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say this was absolute genius and classic Celtic. However, Furuhashi is 27 years old in January, which means that, yes, although he's a bargain and he seems to be a very good signing, if they're looking to try and make money from this or make profit from this, it's sort of a bit late. So this is the sort of player that they're thinking of having around this entire time. And this seems to be a bit of a trend with a few of the players that they brought in this season as well. Players such as Georgios Giacomakis, who is 26 years old, Josip Juranovic, who is also 26 years old, and Karl Starfolt as well, who's also 26 years old. Of course, no club should be really thinking primarily about buying players with the intention of selling them on and only buying them young. But you can see there's a bit of a trend and a bit of a deviation of what they normally do. Therefore, these players must be long-term assets. I mean, of course, I could be proven wrong here. It could be that someone like Furuhashi could have an absolute ripper season now that he's back from injury, and then they sell him on in 1 or 2 years' time and make a comfortable profit on him, because £4.5 million is not a lot. I mean, Celtic have still made some great young signings as well in David Turnbull and Albion Ayeti, I think his name is. They're still young. I think one's like 22 and one's like 23 as well, so plenty of room to growth there for some pretty decent players if they can get them going. But the overall trend is that there's a clear deviation from Celtic's previous transfer policy, and that sort of gives a bit of a sign of laziness and a bit of panic. Unfortunately, Celtic fans, what seems to have happened here is the guys who are running the club at Celtic have seemed to have been a little bit too comfortable with winning and haven't really been thinking about long-term looking after the club, especially with players like Scott Brown who have been so important for the club, being that winning mentality and trying to replicate that for the long term. And now that they've realized, oh my god, we need to try and win things again, suddenly Rangers are back, we've got to try and throw whatever we can to try and plug it up and be competitive. And by doing that, they're signing players like Joe Hart, who used to be a really great goalkeeper, but he's really expensive, and honestly, I can think of plenty of other options that would be a lot better than Joe Hart. No offense to Joe Hart, but that is not sort of the move that Celtic would really be thinking about for doing long term. Also, with the amount of changes that they've had to make this season, so many players leaving and so many players coming in, that sort of makes sense why the players aren't quite gelling yet. That's why there isn't so many performances that are coming out with the results that they want. This is obviously a really tough season for not only the players, but also the manager as well, Ange Postecoglou. This is not an easy club to walk into. This is so difficult. It's so demanding. You have to try and bring success instantly. But the reality is, with so many new players and a new manager and a new style of play, like there's so many things that you've got to try and get right, and that doesn't always happen straight away. Fortunately, Celtic fans, I don't think this is a serious issue. I think it is right now because it's suddenly been sprung on, and this is something that's been swept under the carpet for a couple of years whilst success has remained at the club. But I do think it's a bit of a reality check that was needed for the board to realize that, hey, we need to start doing something here. It could honestly be a blessing in disguise, because now you've got a really competitive league again, and that helps everyone. That helps potentially bring more money to the country. It helps potentially you guys attracting more players. It helps improve Scottish football on the European stage. You can already see that in what's happened with the coefficient. So honestly, this is not a bad thing, but it also creates more value to what you've got. A Monopoly League, yeah, you might be winning the league every single season, and that's great, but if you're winning it every single season, that loses the value. Your expected and marginal utility for winning the league is just, it sort of disappears. It's not the same. And I don't know about you, but if I'm in a Monopoly League, I'd really honestly would prefer trying to get better in European football and trying to actually compete in that, as opposed to just winning the league every single season when it stops losing what it means. I don't know. I'd love to hear from what you guys think. If you're a Celtic fan, let me know what your thoughts are of what's going on this season. If you got any more insight, you might know more than what I do. I've just done a bit of research on this. Other Scottish football fans, I'd love to hear what you think. Obviously, Rangers fans as well, what you think of what's going on with your club and what's happening in Europe. And obviously, you can see it here that you guys being back in the Scottish Premier League is had a huge uplift on the rest of Scottish football. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, guys. If you did, be sure to leave a like button down below. Also as well, guys, most of you who are watching are not actually subscribed. If you like football content, football finance, football economics, this sort of stuff, then this is the channel for you. So hit that subscribe button. Thank you for helping us get to 600 subscribers, and we just hit that one a couple of days ago. So thanks for that, guys. But apart from that, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you very soon.
Being a stranger to what we lost, I'll keep my guard down and hope it comes back around, cause I still just feel like I'm gonna keep running in circles till we find out what we need. Is it just the space between